Nobody took him seriously. 68 years old, hunched shoulders, slow speech. He brewed coffee at the motor pool and handled simple repairs. Young officers laughed behind his back. They called him the old mechanic. Until that phone rang, and 1 hour later, the entire battalion stood at attention outside his garage. Welcome to Daily Story. Before we continue this powerful story of respect, honor, and delayed justice, tell me in the comments which city you're watching from today. And if you believe stories like this need to be heard, hit that subscribe button. These stories matter. The military base's motor pool looked like a massive aircraft hangar where everything from bodywork to engine overhauls took place. It smelled of steel, motor oil, and welding smoke filled the air. Among the 12-person crew working there, one man stood out as the least important in everyone's eyes: Old Pete. That's what they called him, Old Pete. Few people knew his real name was Peter Wilson. His file read, Civilian Personnel, Mechanic. He'd been doing the same job for 15 years, never complained, never took time off. He arrived every morning at 0700 hours and left at 1800. Sometimes he'd even come in on weekends, though nobody asked him to. Physically, there was nothing remarkable about him. Medium height, shoulders slightly hunched forward, hair completely gray. He walked with a slight limp in his left leg. His hands were blackened with motor oil, fingernails always dirty. He wore the same blue coveralls every day, with a small nameplate that read Motor Pool Staff. When young officers and NCOs came by, they usually ignored him. Even when giving him work, they barely spoke to him. "Pete, check the brakes on that vehicle," they'd say, and he'd nod and get to work. He never asked questions, never objected. He'd just take his tools and quietly start working. But this very silence bothered some people. That morning, 3 young officers were in the motor pool. Lieutenant Mike Thompson, 25 years old, a fresh graduate eager to prove himself. First Lieutenant Kevin Martinez, 28 years old, a rebellious type who liked establishing authority. And Lieutenant Brad Johnson, 26 years old, who loved making jokes and tried to lighten every situation. Old Pete was brewing coffee at the corner table. He had an old electric kettle and followed the same ritual every morning. He'd add water, brew the coffee, pour himself a cup, and offer the rest to anyone who wanted some. "Hey Pete," said Lieutenant Johnson with a grin. "Were you ever in the military back in the day?" Pete looked up slowly. His eyes showed fatigue, but also a deep calmness. "Yes, son. I was." "How long?" asked First Lieutenant Martinez, somewhat mockingly. "Long time." "So, what was your rank? Private? Maybe corporal?" Johnson laughed harder. Pete took a sip from his cup. "Doesn't matter anymore." This answer only encouraged the 3 young men more. Lieutenant Thompson jumped in. "Pete, you probably couldn't become an officer like us. Maybe you never got promoted." "Maybe he never even saw combat," said Martinez. "Now he's here doing mechanic work." Pete said nothing. He just finished his coffee, washed his cup, and went to the work desk. He started checking the vehicle maintenance list. But the young officers didn't stop. "Pete," said Johnson, his voice getting louder. "We're real soldiers. What was it like in your time? Would this kind of slacking fly?" Pete stopped, but still didn't answer. "Guess you can't answer, can you?" said Thompson. "Because you never saw real military service." Martinez added, "Doing mechanic work here is different from real soldiering, Pete." This time, Pete turned and looked at them. Something had changed in his eyes. The previous fatigue had been replaced by something else. But he still didn't raise his voice. "Boys," he said in a calm voice. "Everyone has a story. I'm just doing my job." "A story?" said Johnson, laughing. "What kind of story could that be?" "A mechanic story." And right then, the motor pool phone rang. The phone was an old-style unit mounted on the wall. Pete was closest to it, but he didn't reach for it. Usually, official calls were handled by the officers. Lieutenant Thompson reached for the phone. "Fort Bragg Motor Pool, Lieutenant Thompson speaking." The voice from the other end was clear and stern. "This is Colonel Harrison's aide. I need to speak with Peter Wilson immediately." Thompson was confused. "Peter Wilson? You mean Pete the mechanic?" "Yes. Right now." Thompson handed the phone to Pete. "Colonel's aide. They want to talk to you." Pete took the phone. His voice had changed. He was no longer the timid mechanic, but someone completely different. "Peter Wilson here." The voice from the other end, Colonel Harrison needs to see you immediately. Can you come to his office right away? On my way.
He hung up.
The three young officers stared in confusion.
Pete, said Johnson.
What do they want from you? Pete started washing his hands. He was trying to clean off the motor oil.
Not sure.
But there was a change in his tone. He was no longer timid like before. He dried his hands, took off his coveralls. The shirt and pants underneath were simple but clean. But the most surprising thing was what he pulled from his locker. An old but proper military jacket. With rank insignia on it. Colonel's Eagles. The three young officers froze. Pete, now Colonel Peter Wilson, looked completely different. His posture had straightened, shoulders back, head high. The identity he'd hidden for 15 years had suddenly emerged. As he walked toward the door, he turned back.
Boys, he said.
It was a commander's voice.
Do your jobs well.
We'll have things to discuss when I get back.
And he left.
The three young officers looked at each other. They couldn't find words. Was he a colonel? Said Thompson, breathless. We saw the Eagles, said Martinez. But how is that possible? He's been working here as a mechanic for 15 years. Johnson approached Pete's locker. There were several files inside. He took the top file and opened it. Colonel Peter Wilson, Special Forces, 1975 to 2010 active duty, he read slowly. Southeast Asia service 15 years, counterterrorism specialist, 3 distinguished service crosses, Medal of Honor.
He couldn't speak.
Thompson took the file and continued, retired by own request in 2010. Medical report, shrapnel wound left leg, permanent damage.
Shrapnel, said Martinez.
So he was wounded in combat? There's more, said Johnson, finding another file. Special Operations Team Commander, 127 successful operations, 45 rescue missions.
Thompson dropped the file. We mocked him.
We said he never saw real military service. 127 operations, Martinez repeated. More than we'll see in our entire careers. Right then, they heard vehicle engines outside. Several vehicles were parked in front of the motor pool. They looked out the window. The battalion commander's convoy was arriving. Colonel Harrison's vehicle in front, followed by 4 more vehicles. And soldiers were getting out of all of them. The battalion commander, lieutenant colonel, major, NCOs. Nearly 20 people total. And Colonel Peter Wilson was walking in front of them all. When the door opened, battalion commander Colonel Harrison entered first. The other officers followed in order. The motor pool had never seen such a ceremony. Colonel Peter Wilson was walking at the front. No longer a mechanic, but a commander. Sir, said the battalion commander. We wanted to see how you've been working in our motor pool. The 3 young officers had snapped to attention. But their hearts were pounding in their chests. Colonel Wilson turned to them. There was no anger in his eyes. Just deep fatigue. Boys, he said. I retired 15 years ago. But I still wanted to work. I chose this place because I loved the military environment. I didn't feel the need to tell anyone my identity. The battalion commander continued, Colonel Wilson is one of the most experienced Special Forces commanders in the U.S.
Armed Forces.
He served 35 years without interruption, a legend in counterterrorism operations. Thompson, Martinez, and Johnson lowered their heads. But, said Colonel Wilson, I work here as a mechanic. My rank is in the past. Your disrespect toward me wasn't because you didn't know my identity. It was because I appeared old and weak. The silence was heavy. A real soldier, he continued, doesn't disrespect someone they perceive as weak. Because everyone has a story. And you can't judge without knowing that story. The battalion commander added, Colonel Wilson's story begins in 1985. He was a lieutenant then, like you. In his first operation, he fought 6 insurgents single-handedly to rescue his ambush team. He neutralized 3 of them and saved his teammates. He took shrapnel in his left leg but left no one behind. Thompson's eyes filled with tears. In 1998, he searched the mountains for 3 days to rescue 2 captured soldiers. He found them and rescued them alone. In 2003, he volunteered to support a surrounded 12-man team. He succeeded. Martinez and Johnson couldn't lift their heads. In each of his 127 operations, said the battalion commander, Colonel Wilson led from the front. He never left anyone behind. And he never lost a soldier in any of his operations. Colonel Wilson approached the 3 young men.
Boys, he said in a soft voice.
I'm not angry with you.
You were young, you didn't know.
But learn this: real strength shows in how you treat those who appear weak.
Thompson's voice trembled. Colonel, we apologize. We never thought. I know.
But think from now on. The battalion commander added, Colonel Wilson will officially complete his retirement tomorrow. He won't be working in the motor pool anymore. Your last memory here shouldn't be disrespecting him. The next day, a big ceremony was held at the motor pool. Not just the battalion, but officers from other units had come too. Everyone knew Colonel Peter Wilson. Some had served in his operations, others had heard his legends. Thompson, Martinez, and Johnson were talking as they prepared for the ceremony.
15 years, said Thompson.
He worked here for 15 years. And never told anyone who he was.
Because he didn't need to, said Martinez.
He already knew who he was.
We didn't know, said Johnson.
And we saw him as just a mechanic. When the ceremony began, Colonel Wilson looked very different. His uniform was spotless, his rank insignia gleaming. But most striking was the expression on his face. No longer the tired mechanic, but an honorable commander. The battalion commander gave a speech. Colonel Peter Wilson has served this country for 35 years. And in his last 15 years, he continued to serve quietly. He has shown what true sacrifice means. The applause lasted a long time. When Colonel Wilson approached the microphone, the motor pool fell silent.
Friends, he said, I've been happy here.
Because I was still in a military environment. But what I learned was this: true honor doesn't come from how people see you, but from how you see yourself. He looked at Thompson, Martinez, and Johnson. Some young friends asked me who I was. I want to tell them this: who you are isn't determined by what you've done, but by how you act in difficult times. After the ceremony, the three young officers approached Colonel Wilson.
Colonel, said Thompson,
I want to ask you something.
Go ahead, son.
Why didn't you ever tell anyone who you were? Colonel Wilson smiled. Because I didn't need to. I already knew who I was. And that's what mattered. But we disrespected you.
You did. But you learned. That's also important.
Martinez asked, Don't you hate us? Why would I hate you? You're young, you're learning. I made mistakes when I was young too. What matters is not making the same mistake again. Johnson's eyes filled with tears. Colonel, we're so ashamed.
Don't be ashamed.
But don't forget. And from now on, don't judge people without knowing their story. When Colonel Wilson's last day came, everything in the motor pool had changed. Not just physically, but spiritually. Everyone was treating each other differently. Thompson now treated other civilian personnel more respectfully. Martinez had stopped calling the old security guard Pops, and started saying Sir. Johnson was more careful when making jokes. While packing Colonel Wilson's desk, old photographs fell out of his locker. From operations, team members, photos taken when he was a young officer. In one photo, he looked very young. With lieutenant's bars, alongside his team members. Mountains in the background.
Where's this photo from? Asked Thompson.
1987, Afghanistan, said Colonel Wilson. My first major operation. I was your age then. Were you scared?
Of course, I was scared.
Everyone gets scared. But I did my duty despite the fear. Martinez asked, Do you ever regret it? Your military career.
Colonel Wilson thought. No. Because I had a purpose. To protect this country, these people. And I did that.
Do you regret working in the motor pool?
No.
Because I had a purpose here, too.
To still be useful.
And I did that too. On the last day, everyone in the motor pool gathered. They wanted to give Colonel Wilson a gift, but he declined. My gift, he said, is that you've learned. Now you know how to treat people. As he walked out the door, he turned back one last time.
Boys, he said.
Remember, true greatness is doing what's right even when no one is watching. I did that here for 15 years. You do it in your lives.
And he left. Months passed.
Thompson, Martinez, and Johnson were completely different people now. Not just in the motor pool, but in all areas of life, they were more respectful, more thoughtful. One day, a new civilian employee came to the motor pool.
An older, quiet man. He would be doing cleaning work.
The young officers called him Sir, offered him coffee, and listened to his story. Because now they knew, every person has a story. And you can't judge anyone without knowing that story. This was the greatest legacy Colonel Peter Wilson left behind: respect. He had served quietly, hidden his identity, but taught the most valuable lesson. True greatness doesn't come from how people see you, but from how you see yourself. And sometimes, the greatest commanders are hidden in the most ordinary disguises. So, have you ever encountered someone like this? Someone who appeared ordinary but had an extraordinary past? Share your story in the comments. Tell us which city you're watching from. If this story added something to your life, subscribe and support this channel. Because at Daily Story, we give voice to forgotten heroes. See you in the next story. And remember, sometimes the greatest lessons come from the most unexpected people.